Welcome back to another video, guys. Today we're going to be talking about all 5 classes in Diablo 4, and we're going to be diving into which ones are performing well and which ones are performing poorly. I haven't made a video in quite a while because I really wanted to experience this game. I wanted to get all 5 classes to level 100 and really get an understanding for each class and its pros and its cons so that we could dive into this. And the first class that I want to talk about today is going to be the Rogue. The Rogue is incredible. It is so much fun. It is the fastest class in the game. You can get 1 to 100 faster on a Rogue than any other class. It certainly feels that way. At least you have so much mobility between dash and shadow step. You have crazy damage with twisting blades, even rapid fire flurry, really strong, good options. Now, another really nice thing about the Rogue is that it just comes online so quickly. You really get to put all of your skills together really fast. You can go for a really early double imbuement build with dash and shadow step, and you can pretty much have that set up by roughly level 20. Another nice element to the Rogue is how easy it is to hit the 200% movement speed cap, especially if you just get a little bit of movement speed on elite kill. You're hopping from pack to pack so quickly at maximum movement speed, and every time you shred an elite, you're just gaining max movement speed, and it really allows you to move through dungeons really quickly. One of the last really nice things that I want to talk about on the Rogue is they're not as squishy as people seem to suggest. At least if you build your character properly, you should not be dying in one hit very often, at least when you're doing same level content and you're just going through the course of the game. Of course, when you're pushing Nightmare Dungeon 100 or fighting Uber Lilith, of course you can get one shot, but any class can in those scenarios. So let's dive into a quick example. Alrighty, so I popped open a tier 46 Nightmare Dungeon. These are going to be level 100 enemies, and so I'm fighting things that are the same level as me. This is going to be pretty common while you're leveling up and going through the course of the game. For the pant slot, I'm using Temerity. This seems to work pretty well on Rogue because Rogue is not naturally generating barriers, and so this is a nice way to add additional damage reduction to your character. Your other defensive piece, at least for most classes, is going to be your chest. You're just going to want to stack a ton of damage reduction on there. So between the chest and the pants, you're pretty tanky. So we start by popping a potion, of course, because that's going to proc Temerity to give us a nice little barrier. Let's run in and just try to get hit by a bunch of mobs and see what happens while we have that barrier up. So as you can see, I can just stand in this. You know, I could just pop a potion on occasion, but I can have mobs completely surrounding me, beating on me, and I can pretty much potion through the whole thing. Alright, so I'm going to gather a few potions and then go ahead and dive into a pack that maybe has a few elites to get a little bit more damage on my character. Alright, so here we are. Pop a Dark Shroud. So as you can see, I don't really think that Rogue is as squishy as people suggest. Yes, you're probably a little squishier than the average class, but people seem to imply that if you're going to play a Rogue, you're just going to get one shot all the time, and you're going to have so many problems with dying, and you always have to be on the move so quick and playing so optimally. And that's really just not that true, especially if you're doing same level content. Alright, so moving along to some of the cons of the Rogue, although I think this class is incredible, it does have a few weaknesses to it. And the first one that I want to talk about is your unstoppable options. Shadow Step is great. Really low cooldown, you can use the boots that give it 2 charges, and so it's a great skill. The problem with it is that it requires a target. So think about yourself in a scenario where you've killed a couple of elites that are going to do that fire explosion at the end, and you get CC'd and there's no targets that you can hit with the Shadow Step. So you're just stuck and about to take 2 explosive blasts. Now, alternatively, you also have Concealment, which is a pretty solid skill for Unstoppable, gets you out of combat, gives you movement speed, gives you that stealth. I think that Concealment is really good when you're playing a ranged build, especially something like Penetrating Shot. You want to give yourself the opportunity to reposition yourself. But it seems like most of the meta builds right now are opting to go for Shadow Step. Of course, just because of that low cooldown, you can get 2 charges if you want. Great mobility, it allows you to just speed farm incredibly fast from hopping to pack, and that movement speed bonus from Concealment is maybe not as good as it seems, because as I had mentioned earlier, it's pretty easy to hit the movement speed cap on the Rogue. Now, the only other con that I can really come up with for the Rogue is that it does require some pretty optimal play. I think it's a fairly friendly class. I think that anybody can play it and get to level 100 without too many complications, but if you're really going to play this optimally, you're going to go fight Uber Lilith, or you're going to push Nightmare Dungeons, it's a tough class. It requires a lot of very precise positioning and timing. Alrighty, so moving on to the Sorcerer. Really love this class. I had a lot of fun with it. I did make a video not that long ago where I had talked about how it is the worst class in the game, and I'm not necessarily sure that that's true anymore. With the recent buffs to Fireball, Frozen Orb, Chain Lightning, this class has come a long way from where it was at. Now, it also seems like Blizzard is kind of pulling back on that whole Kiss Curse element to the Sorcerer, where every unique or legendary gives you this really cool ability, but then it takes something away from you. I think that they've learned their lesson, and they're going to not be doing that so much anymore, and so I really have high hopes for the future of the Sorcerer. Now, another nice element about the Sorcerer is you do have a basic skill build. I don't think it's anything compared to Ice Shards or Blizzard, but you do have that option, and it's nice, especially in the early game. I actually like leveling with an Arclash build because I don't have to worry about mana. You can definitely play Arclash all the way to level 100, or at least until you find some kind of aspect that's going to help you with resource, so that you can respec into another build and not have to worry about mana all the time. Now, another pro that I have to mention for the Sorcerer is the Raiment of the Infinite. This unique is so insane. It turns teleport into possibly the most versatile skill in the entire game. So teleport, of course, on its own is already good. You're going to use it before you even get Raiment of the Infinite. But once you have this, teleport can do so many different things for you. And even the increased cooldown on the teleport is not all that bad, because we have a lot of ways of lowering that cooldown. I've never felt like this punished me so much to the point where I didn't want to use it because the cooldown was too long on teleport. Honestly, it was hardly noticeable. So to quickly go over all the things that the teleport button does is it breaks crowd control, it moves you from pack to pack, it can escape a bad situation, it can group up enemies, and it stuns enemies. So it just does so much for you. This one button is so incredible, especially when you get Raiment of the Infinite. But now, of course, we do have to talk about the bad parts of the Sorcerer, and the very first thing that I want to start with is we're an intelligence class. Although this might be a good thing in Season 2 or 3, whenever they do decide to fix all resistances, but this 33.9% increase to all elements is pretty much useless. It's not really adding any damage reduction to my character in a meaningful way. I don't think I'm going to dive into this too far. Pretty much everybody who's been playing Diablo IV knows that resistances are broken, and so this is a problem with the class that I hope gets fixed by Season 2. Now, the next con to this class is you are kind of locked into certain skills. Just about every single Sorcerer build is using these same exact skills 1 through 4. Once you get to the defensive skill tree, you're just jamming all of your points into these skills, and pretty much every Sorcerer is going to do it. So you don't really have that many different options with how you're going to build your character on the 1 to 4 buttons. They're kind of just locked in and predetermined if you really want to succeed on the Sorcerer. Now, the final con that I want to talk about with the Sorcerer is vulnerable. Everybody knows that if you don't have vulnerable on your target, you're not doing good damage. And Sorcerer is probably the least reliable class when it comes to consistently applying that vulnerable effect. Now, I'm still set up on my Arclash build, which is definitely not the best build on the Sorcerer when it comes to applying vulnerable, but I've only got one choice, and it's Frost Nova, and it's on a cooldown. And while we're on the note of vulnerability, what is the deal with Exploit on the Sorcerer? The other classes just hit a target and automatically apply vulnerable. This is so bad. We need this to do the same thing on the Sorcerer because it puts the class at a pretty massive disadvantage. Now, of course, while we're on the topic of the exploit glyph, it is worth mentioning, of course, that Necromancer does have the same problem. They are not applying vulnerable with the exploit glyph, but it's kind of irrelevant for the Necromancer because their primary core skill, Bone Spear, is going to apply vulnerable anyways. Well, that just about wraps up the Sorcerer, and so let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the Druid. My experience with the Druid was so much better than I was anticipating. I really did not think that I was going to like this class, especially after we had the open beta and the server slam. Druid just seemed like such an underperforming class. But despite its weaknesses in the early game, as you start to level up and you get aspects that really enhance your build, the Druid completely evolves. To take a quick look at one of those aspects on the Druid that's going to completely transform your character, we have the Shockwave Totemic Staff. Now, this is an offensive aspect, so it can be applied to multiple different pieces, but if you've got a two-hander and you're playing Pulverize, 200% increased damage and a Shockwave with your Pulverize, absolutely changes how you play this build. I remember as I was leveling prior to getting this aspect on one of my two-handed stabs, it was rough. I was killing things so slowly, and the moment I got this, and fortunately, the very first one that I got while I was leveling up was a perfect roll. Everything was just dying in one hit for about the next 15 levels on that character. So the Druid is just incredibly tanky. Between barriers, fortify, you've also got debilitating roar here to reduce enemy damage that's nearby to you. While I was playing through the game on the Druid, I honestly felt like I couldn't die. If I were going to play a character on hardcore, I would honestly probably go for the Druid. It's just so tanky, and it's a very forgiving class too. If you're brand new to the game and you just want something kind of easy and a smooth experience, yeah, you'll have a rough start, but it's still not that difficult. It'll just be a little slower than other classes, but once you start getting gear, the class just becomes so easy to play. The Druid also just happens to have a lot of top tier builds. There's a lot of different builds that you can play with the Druid. You're not necessarily locked into one super build. You've got Pulverize, you've got Werewolf Tornado, you've got Lightning Storm, Shred. There's just a lot of different options for this Druid. And we've also got to talk about the incredible kill speed of bosses with the Werewolf Tornado build. I'm going to go ahead and put up a clip from Rax absolutely destroying the Wandering Death.
Hello, Wandering Death. Do you like tornadoes by chance? Well, first of all, you should stop moving. That's the first thing. Do you like, what's happening? We lagging? What? Wait, he's coming back! What? He's here again! What? Wait, what? You want round 2? Wandering Death? Look at the damage. Look at the damage. Look at the damage. Gone.
The build seems to be doing so much damage that it causes the game to lag while it's trying to calculate everything. Kind of reminds me of area damage in Diablo 3. It is just so insane, and you can carry any group through any content with how much damage you're doing. Now, when it comes to the cons for the Druid, I've really only got 2 that I can think of. The first one is, of course, that early game rough leveling experience, and I think that that's mostly tied into the Codex of Power. Most classes get something from the Codex that's going to really make their build go. The Druid just doesn't really have any of those options. For example, this is not in the Codex of Power. If I'm not mistaken, in Season 1, they did add this aspect to the Codex, where of course your Pulverize causes the tectonic spikes to come out, but it's definitely not the same as this. Although this will enhance your build a little bit, I wouldn't say that this is necessarily the build-defining piece. It's not the one that's going to allow you to one-shot everything while you're going through the game, and so you do kind of have to wait until you get a good aspect. I would say the best 2 are probably the one that causes tornadoes to lock onto targets, or of course the Shockwave Pulverize. The only other con when it comes to the Druid is Tempest Roar. It's just too hard to find. I went 1 to 100, I never got one to drop. My plan was to play Pulverize because I got this awesome aspect for it, and then I was going to transition into Werewolf Tornado. I had a ton of gear that's actually still sitting in my stash for that transition, but then it just never happened. Based on the most recent news that I've heard, it sounds like they're going to increase our ability to target farm, which I think is really going to help Druids out, especially if you want to play one of those Tempest Roar builds. Alrighty, so moving on to the Necromancer. To start with the pros, I think this is the coolest cosmetic in the game. It's a little bit over the top, but I absolutely love it. I had to get it. Now, I do have to preface this section on the Necromancer a little bit. I have a lot of cons for the Necromancer, and not that many pros, but one thing that I will say is that the pros for this class are so incredible that I still think it's a pretty solid class all around. So of course the first pro for the Necromancer is just Bone Spear. It just does insane damage. It's incredibly forgiving. You can completely miss your target, and then it's going to split, come back, and hit the target anyways. All around, Bone Spear is just great for AoE damage. It can kill bosses, it can kill elites. It's pretty much a skill that you can just use and use and use and never really have to use anything else. It's a little bit resource hungry, but it's not really a problem in the end game as long as you've got the right aspects. Now that kind of just sums up my pros for the Necromancer, though. I did enjoy the class. I do think that it was fun to play, but it does get a little old, a little quick when you're just hitting Bone Spear over and over and over. 1 to 50, I was not actually playing Bone Spear. I was doing kind of a Sever minion build, and it was a bit of fun, but I wanted to switch to Bone Spear because that's what all the talk is about. Everybody says it's so great. And the second I switched to it, I realized that I was never going to go back. It's just way too powerful, and it really outshines all of the other builds that the Necromancer has access to. Now, I'm not saying that all of the other Necromancer builds are bad per se, but they are outclassed. Now to move into the cons, the first one I want to talk about is minions, and minions in this game are just mindless. We have no control over them whatsoever. I think this is a very unusual shift from where we were at in Diablo 3, where you could allow your minions to charge just by hitting a button. Now the next thing is, if you do want to play a summoner build, it is incredibly reliant on the Ring of Mendeln. So to take a quick look at the Ring of Mendeln, if you haven't heard of it, while you have 7 or more minions, you gain Lucky Hit, up to a 10% chance to empower all of your minions, causing the next attack from each to explode for up to 15,313 damage. Of course, in a minion build, you're pretty much always going to have 7 or more minions. You're constantly respawning them. You have this season, of course, the Malignant Heart that is going to activate corpse skills for you, and so it's pretty difficult to actually lose all of your minions, especially, same level content. Of course, when you're pushing, it can be a little bit more difficult, but while you're just going through the game, you're constantly automatically resummoning your minions. So keeping this effect up is pretty easy, and you're just stacking a ton of Lucky Hit on this build and just causing constant explosions to go off everywhere. Now, I haven't personally put this build together, but I did watch some of Crip's gameplay, and it looks really solid. It looks like a fun build, but again, it's similar to the Tempest Roar situation where if you don't get this, the build is just going to underperform. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about is your skill slots on the Necromancer. Should you choose to go with a summoning build, you're going to have your skeletons, you're going to have your golem. I don't like that this takes up 2 spots on your skill bar. It really kind of limits the options of what you can do with this class, and it's kind of strange that should you choose to go with minions, you get kind of punished because you lose 2 of your skill bar slots. Now, it seems like Blizzard is absolutely aware of this, but it doesn't seem like they're motivated to change this. And so I kind of fear for the future of the Necromancer that should you want to play a summoning build, you're always going to be stuck with less skills on your bar, which just creates less engaging gameplay. I really honestly don't think that the Necromancer would be overtuned if you didn't have to have these on your skill bar. I really don't think it would just become the best class in the game out of nowhere, and if it did, they could adjust it in another way. But allowing us to have more build diversity instead of 2 skills just completely locked up would just create a more engaging gameplay loop. The next thing about the Necromancer is its mobility. The only real mobility skill that we have is Blood Mist, and it's kind of even hard to call this a mobility skill. Now, this skill is really good still. Of course, it is a form of unstoppable. It's going to keep us alive. It allows you to become invincible, and if you're playing an army build, they can keep attacking while you're kind of just immune to damage. I just find it so strange that this slows us down, and it's like, yes, it lets us move through targets, so it's kind of a mobility skill. It makes you invulnerable, but that's all you really get. In ARPGs, everybody just wants to go fast. You want to kill things fast, you want to move fast, loot fast. Everything is just kind of about going fast. It just makes the game more fun. And Necromancer is just slow. It's definitely the slowest class. You have the least number of mobility skills, and then the one that you have is so unusual. And of course, the very final con that I want to talk about with the Necromancer, very similar to the Sorcerer, resistances are broken. They don't really do much. And so again, exact same thing as the Sorcerer here. We are weaker until they fix this in a future season. Now, I already think the Necromancer is in a pretty good place, especially when it comes to survivability. I don't feel like I was dying frequently, and I had pretty good tankiness. Once resistances get fixed, I think it's going to be a huge deal for the Necromancer. I'm honestly kind of wondering how they're going to balance resistances, because if these start to work in Season 2 and they don't change the way that damage reduction and armor work, I almost wonder if the Necromancer could be too tanky. We'll have to see what Blizzard ends up doing, but I am very curious because I already don't feel like this game just does too much damage to you. I kind of feel like we have good survivability, especially if you build your character correctly. And so these int-based classes are seemingly going to get a lot tankier when I already feel like they have somewhat decent survivability. Alright, so last up is the Barbarian. Barbarian is a fun class, I suppose. I really enjoy Whirlwind. I also liked it in Diablo 3, Diablo 2. It's a very iconic skill to the game, and I'm glad that they made it as good as they did. Allowing a character to move while doing damage and also move through enemies is really just incredible, especially for quality of life. Now, the next pro for the Barbarian has got to be two-handed weapons. This is just crazy for aspects, getting 2 aspects with doubled capability. I'm kind of trying out a funky build right now with really high basic attack speed to generate fury. It's a little clunky, but it's fun, and I really like this about the Barbarian because having two-handed weapons really kind of opens the door to allow you to try a lot of different things. And of course, Triple Shout. This is kind of a pro and a con, and I'm going to get into the cons later, but Triple Shout is just incredible in this game. You gain movement speed, damage reduction, unstoppable, increased damage, more duration to berserking. Triple Shout just kind of does everything for your character, and it makes you incredibly powerful. And on top of that, it also gives you fury generation, which is so great for your sustained damage. The problem, of course, with this is being forced into Triple Shout. It's pretty much essential for the class. If you really want to perform at a high level with the Barbarian, you have to play Triple Shout. It's kind of similar to the Sorcerer, where you're locked into all of these different defensive skills. Barbarian kind of has a similar problem, where you're just locked into using 3 shouts. On top of that, the Barbarian is a little bit weaker in the early game, kind of similar to the Druid. It does take a while to get your feet off the ground and really get moving with this class. The early game is especially problematic when it comes to fury generation. It just constantly felt like I was running out of fury, and the guide that I was following while leveling had suggested Unbridled Rage, which, although I would one-shot everything, I would never have any fury to attack, so I'd be spamming Lunging Strike just to get enough fury to use one Hammer of the Ancients and then just kill everything. I ended up switching off of that just because it felt so oppressive to play that way. Eventually, of course, I did go back to Unbridled Rage. This is absolutely insane, especially once you've solved your fury generation problems. The next issue, though, with the Barbarian is how dominant Whirlwind is. I do not think that this needs a nerf by any means, but this class just feels so much better when you're playing Whirlwind right now, especially with Hammer of the Ancients just not feeling as good as it used to. Upheaval just kind of underperforming. It did so great in the Server Slam in the open beta weekend. It was a lot of fun. But they've tuned those back so far, and it really just feels like we're kind of forced into Whirlwind right now, with Hoda as a kind of secondary option. Now, the next problem with this class is Fortify, and how quickly it drops off. When you're playing the Barbarian, you are forced to move from pack to pack so quickly because you have to keep that Fortify up. You're the most vulnerable in combat during those first few seconds until you've got Fortify enabled. It almost feels like it encourages this kind of frantic gameplay loop, and it would be nice if there was a bit more time before that Fortify started to drop off, and I'll get a little bit more into that later and talk about some potential solutions to that so that you're not really forced to just constantly move from pack to pack to pack to pack and ignore all the gear because you don't want your Fortify to drop off. It's just a bit much. The next thing about the Barbarian is kind of funny. Using potions can actually be harmful to you at times because, of course, if you're healing in life and then you're exceeding where your Fortify is at, you're no longer fortified, so now you're taking a lot more damage. I suppose that it kind of encourages this high skill gameplay, but it does feel a little bit counterintuitive, I guess. Overall, I honestly don't feel like the Barbarian is quite as tanky as it should be. I think in this game it should be like kind of on par with that tankiness of like the Werebear Druid, but it really doesn't feel like it is. I did die fairly frequently on the Barbarian, probably more than any other class, if I'm being honest. So bottom line, the worst class in the game, in my opinion, right now, is got to be the Barbarian. I really hope that Blizzard has some plans for Season 2. I hope it doesn't take until Season 3 to really introduce more options for the Barbarian. One example that I've kind of thought of is, what if they introduced an aspect that said, while you have no shouts equipped on your bar, you gain something. That something could be movement speed and resource generation. It could be damage reduction and resource generation. There's a lot of different things that you could do to encourage Barbarians to not play shouts. I don't think that further nerfing shouts is the solution. You shouldn't nerf them into the ground because the Barbarian will then just kind of have nothing. It will become even worse. So the solution should involve some kind of encouragement to get away from the shouts. This could allow a lot of build diversity, while you could play a shout build or you could choose not to and reap certain benefits as a result. Another option, of course, could be adding it to a glyph. Introduce a glyph to the game or change one of the glyphs that's not really being utilized right now and allow it to say something like, while you don't have a shout active, you gain X effect. This allows you to still continue to maybe use one shout on your bar for emergency situations, but you won't want to be using all three because then you won't be gaining whatever effect that glyph has. Alright, so looping back to Fortify real quick, they've got to change this in one way or another. You just have to be moving from pack to pack to keep it up, and it's so strange that as a Barbarian, you're in way more danger just approaching a small little pack while you don't have Fortify up, as opposed to pulling a huge pack and having a bunch of Fortify. It's just kind of strange, and again, seems a little bit counterintuitive. And as I had mentioned earlier, with the potions, it can make your Fortify drop off, so it would be nice if there was something introduced to the Barbarian class where using a potion could also generate some amount of Fortify. I don't know if it has to be equal to the amount of life that the potion generates. That would be pretty insane, but allow it to not be quite as punishing to just heal yourself. Taking a quick look at Iron Skin, Steel Yourself gaining a barrier that absorbs 50% of your missing life for 5 seconds. Of course, there is also an aspect that is combined with this that allows Iron Skin to give you Unstoppable. The problem with this is that if you're at full life, the game won't allow you to use Iron Skin. So if you get hit by a CC and then you get one shot, you're kind of just doomed because you couldn't even use Iron Skin before you died. I think they should just remove that altogether. You should be allowed to use this while at max life. Of course, you won't gain any barrier, but at least you can reap the benefits of the Unstoppable and not get one shot when you're pushing higher content. Moving over to Frenzy real quick, I think that this needs a buff. It says, if Frenzy hits an enemy, its attack speed is increased by 20% for 3 seconds up to 60%. So of course you can get attacking really quick. The issue with this is that I think it needs to give you movement speed too. When compared to Lunging Strike, for example, this just seems like the choice pick for the Barbarian because this gives you so much mobility and allows you to engage really quickly, get right inside of a pack with no issues. Lunging Strike is really good. I don't think that it's overtuned or that it needs a nerf, but I think we need a bit more incentive to be using things like Frenzy or Bash. And last of all, taking a quick look at the weapon expertise, Two-Handed Axe is just way too good. Vulnerable damage is way too good. We've kind of gone over this in this video, but all these other choices are just kind of irrelevant, especially if you really want to optimize your character. And again, I don't think that the solution is necessarily nerfing this. I understand that you can't just buff everything because then things start to get out of control. I am under the impression that it seems like Blizzard is going to be reworking Vulnerable, so perhaps that'll kind of fix this issue in Season 2, but I would still like to see some more incentives with these other ones. For example, why can't this give more lucky hit? It's still probably not going to be as good as Two-Handed Axe expertise, but it can open the door to more options for us. All of these could be looked at and potentially buffed up a bit so that Two-Handed Axe is not the only option. Now, maybe I'm being a little bit dramatic by saying the only option. Of course, there are bleed builds that might use Two-Handed Sword expertise, for example, but generally speaking, I think it would just be nice to see some of these other ones buffed up. Well, guys, I know that it's been a while since I've made a video. I'm going to start putting out a bit more content now. I just really wanted to experience the game first. I wanted to have some kind of idea of how each class works and how their different builds work so that I could actually bring you good content and not just make videos. Let me know what changes you would like to see in Diablo 4. Let me know which class you think is the best and the worst. I'd love to have a discussion with you guys. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.